welcome back to Breakdown of Science. My name is Jan.
My name is Michelle.
And I'm Maruf.
And today is our last episode. And for it, we're going to do one final Q&A to answer the remaining questions that you've had sent to us. And we appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I can't believe it's already our last episode.
It is, yeah. These last 2 months have been very interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
I never really saw myself ending up doing any sort of like podcast or YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, same.
In any sort of capacity.
Yeah.
So this has been a very interesting learning experience for me.
Yeah.
Sure thing.
Project. Yeah.
Yeah. And while we are ending this series here with this episode, it doesn't mean that this podcast itself will completely disappear, at least hopefully not. Maybe at some point in the future, either with us three or whoever else, might continue this in a second season, though we need to know where our life is going before we can actually determine that. But thank you for joining us, those who have been here from the beginning and those who have been here since today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us and being part of this. And let's get into it. And also, after this episode goes up, if we do end up receiving any questions, any comments or anything, while we might not do another episode where we answer them in this format, we will try to at least answer them in the comments as fast as we can and as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Having said that, we'll go right into our first question. And this one goes back to our AI episode. So, could AI ever, quote-unquote, hallucinate a scientific discovery that turns out to be true? Theoretically, yes. AI models, especially large language models, or LLMs, generate information by recognizing patterns in existing data, as we've said in the episode. And so occasionally these quote-unquote hallucinations, which are fabricated but somewhat coherent sounding ideas, may stumble upon real or unexplored possibilities.
Yeah, so for example, we can see an AI might propose a novel protein structure or probably chemical compound that seems kind of fictional but could later be synthesized and show useful properties. Or probably in drug discoveries, AI generated molecules sometimes match later lab confirmed leads.
Yeah. But however, AI still obviously lacks intent and understanding, so any discovery still requires human hypothesis testing, the validation and also the interpretation. So in short, AI might guess it right, but it doesn't know it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this situation is somewhat similar to a hypothetical, like a brain thought experiment thing, where it suggests that if you have infinite monkeys and infinite amount of typewriters for each of the monkeys in a room, eventually one of them will end up writing Shakespeare's Hamlet. It doesn't mean that the monkey... Yeah. So this doesn't mean that the monkey knew of Shakespeare, knew of Hamlet, or had the literary capacity to write Hamlet. Who knows, maybe it did. But it doesn't mean that it created or discovered Hamlet. It's just that when you're dealing with possibility, when you're dealing with statistics, there's always a probability of something real happening in space of chaos or randomness. And that's more or less what AI does. It just uses the probability of like what could happen. And one thing that can also be said is that anyone can just say a random hypothesis, and it might not be something that can be proven true or false right now, but it could be later on in the future, 5, 10 years, whatever. But in those cases, when it comes from an actual person, there is some thought process going through it based on of personal experience and personal understanding of everything, whether we realize that or not. So even though there is that similarity of just a random hypothesis being given, there is a distinction between just something that's purely based off of just more or less predetermined probability of just saying something with no understanding of it, and saying something because you have a certain understanding of the situation. But for a better understanding of how an AI actually works, we do have the episode all set up for you guys to watch if interested. And as such, we continue to the next question.
So yeah, the next question I got is, how does your brain decide which memories to keep and which to discard during sleep, especially when you are overwhelmed with information? So this goes to, I think, one of the episodes we had, right?
Yeah, our
sleep.
second episode, I believe, yeah.
It's the second episode. So we also talked there a lot, but in short, like memory consolidation happens primarily during the phase called slow wave sleep, or like REM sleep, and the brain uses some criterias like emotional salience or repetition and relevance. So for your information, repetition and relevance is kind of like the memories that's recently practiced or repeatedly reinforced. And emotional salience is like kind of emotionally charged events which would be prioritized by our amygdala hippocampus into action.
Yeah, and then there's also the prediction of usefulness. Did you want to say something, Jon?
No, you.
Okay.
Just
So-
confirming.
Okay. Then there's also the prediction of usefulness. So that's where the brain basically favors memories that it expects to need it later. So this is why revising before sleep boosts recall. And then there's also the hippocampal replay. So during sleep, the neural activity patterns from the day are basically replayed, and that helps to cement long-term memories, for example. Yeah.
So also when we're overwhelmed, the brain triages like unused or low priority memories are more likely to be burned, a bit like garbage collection in coding.
In code, yeah.
In code.
Going back to the prediction of usefulness and hippocampus replay, it is like said that revising before sleep helps, but it is also a bit something to point out that doesn't refer to like 5 or 10 minutes before sleep, as you rarely even remember what you did the moments before you fell asleep.
Yeah. I can attest to that.
I think all of us can, with late time studies for exams.
Yeah.
But it's more so in reference like about an hour or so before that.
Yeah.
And for hippocampus replay, this is more or less how, in terms of like neural activity, dreams get described, of just during the REM cycle, the brain it gets reactivated in this this moment of like memorization period, and more or less it ends up developing dreams because of just the mixing and matching of different memories and emotions, developing it.
Exactly.
But moving forward
Yeah.
a bit, this seems to be a bit of a going down a bit of a memory lane, going to past episodes.
Yeah.
So next one seems to be also related to our second episode.
Okay, yeah. So the third question also we got like from probably our second episode.
Mhm.
So why does caffeine make some people more anxious while other feel like more focused or awake, right? So that's a really good question. So this difference is largely on genetic and neurochemical properties of on souls. Kind of, for example, CYP1A2 gene, which determines how quickly you metabolize caffeine. Fast metabolizers, like who metabolizes faster, get alertness without much anxiety, and who doesn't do that, their heart, like they experience jitters, heart palpitations, and more anxiety.
Mhm.
So the another cause is adenosine receptor sensitivity. So what caffeine does is caffeine blocks adenosine, the sleepiness molecule. So people vary in how their receptor respond to caffeine.
Yeah, and that's from the genetics, but then there's also more just neurochemical or like more personal situations, and then there is like baseline anxiety, which is if you're already an anxious person, if you already have anxiety, caffeine might amplify the sympathetic nervous system activity, which, for example, increasing the cortisol levels, or it could also just be a mix of your just personality and also the environment that you're in. That basically means that the context of when you're drinking the coffee or why you're drinking the coffee matters. Basically meaning that if you're stressed and you're drinking caffeine, there's a greater perceived anxiety to it. And then there's also like you can get caffeine tolerance, because caffeine is more or less just a drug and you can get used to it, meaning you have to get more caffeine, and without it your body goes into shock and you have caffeine withdrawal, which is you also get a sense of anxiety in that way as well.
Okay, I didn't know that, but good to know.
Yeah. So be careful how much coffee and how frequently you're actually drinking it. Since we are in the topic of some genetics, let's go to more of our more recent episodes. So, how might CRISPR affect biodiversity, especially if gene drives are used in open ecosystems? So, more or less, how does CRISPR affect things in the wilds and not in a lab setting? So, gene drives are powerful but very risky. There's the positive potential and also a negative. So the positive is that it could wipe out, for example, malaria by limiting mosquito population or modifying them to be non-carriers. However, a negative effect can be that it can reduce genetic diversity, it can end up eliminating entire species, or even cause unintended ecological collapses. If you didn't know, mosquitoes are actually a pollinator for cocoa beans, for example, mostly in rainforest areas. And so if mosquito populations drop drastically, the amount of cocoa that is pollinated and fruit that is grown decreases, which ends up decreasing the global supply of chocolate.
Well, that's one way to see it.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
but there's more things as well.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so there are obviously risks, as Jan has mentioned. So there's on one side like ecological cascade. So that's like removing or altering a species that may disrupt food webs. And there's also the gene flow across the borders. So wild gene drives don't respect national or ecosystem boundaries.
So yeah, there's also two or three more things I want to talk about. Is first is resistance evolution. So the target organism might evolve resistance, creative, and it will create then super variants, which we cannot contradict with our things, whatever our previous method was.
Yeah.
And there's also an ethical dilemma, which is really, really big in it. So who decide which species are like so-called bad, and what if the indigenous communities that has something to do with them, a lot to do with them than us, oppose this type of intervention. And so the global consensus is proceeded with extreme caution, using reversible or self-limiting gene drives in the early stages. So
Yeah.
Yeah, let's move on to the next question. So regarding affection of music to our mood, so
Back to the music to our mood. So
Yeah.
this person has read once that in a supposed Japanese study, a
Yeah.
group of expecting mothers frequently placed speakers to their bellies
yeah,
to play music, and they intended to familiarize their babies with the music, but when born, those babies had hearing impairments, hearing damage.
okay.
Let's
Well,
go a bit to I think it was regarding one of our I think like second Q&A episode, where we had some questions regarding how music impacts mood and heart rates.
yeah, true. Yeah. So far we couldn't find the Japanese study that looked into how playing music, to a fetus impact the hearing, but we did found one that showed positive effects, but not hearing impairment.
Yeah, there was this study called Maternal Music Exposure During Pregnancy Influences Neonatal Behavior, an open lab randomized control trial. That's the title of the study. Yeah. So basically, the pregnant woman who listened to music daily had newborns who performed better on the BNBAS, which stands for the Brazelton Neonatal Behavior Assessment Scale, which mainly measures neurobehavioral development like orientation, attention, adaptation to stimuli, and a few more, but it does not assess hearing ability itself. And for a bit of context, the neonatal period is referring to the first 4 weeks of a child's life, so around the first 28 days of it.
Yeah, so in this case, these babies showed improvements in areas like following the sounds and calming themselves with that, and in general interaction with the environment. And there was zero evidence of hearing damage or such kind of things. In fact, the study also suggests that parental music exposure can positively influence in early brain and even in kind of behavioral development of the child.
Yeah.
So we got another question, which is, I think it's quite interesting. So it says some persons could tell the rain is coming by feeling, the scar residue upon a surgery, and how and why.
So before a storm, the drop in the pressure, which is also called barometric pressure, allows your tissue, including stiff scar tissue, to expand slightly, which can tug on infrared nerve endings with the fibrous scar, and that triggers sensations of tightness or stinging or arcing.
Yeah.
So colder and damper weather that often accompanies kind of with low pressure, and it can further thicken these joints and tissue fluids, and the circulation would be kind of slower, so making scars feel even more tense and painful. So these are the two things. That's how we kind of understand what's coming.
Yeah, and on top of these physiological effects, scars frequently harbor neuromas or adhesions. So they're basically like knots of hypersensitive nerves. So any small change in the tissue volume or movement can set them off. And because many of us expect to feel better they're coming, so our brains can amplify these signals through confirmation bias. So a phenomenon that's sometimes called meteoropathy. I cannot say.
Meteoropathy, basically like
Thank you.
telepathy or that
Yeah.
type of like thing. And there's
Exactly.
also people saying like I can smell rain.
Really?
That actually has a specific name. It's called petrichor, the smell
Yeah.
of rain.
Yeah.
It's not actually the smell of rain itself, but more so of the wet soil.
Yeah.
And there's actually like a thought going around that's saying that the reason why we've been able to develop such a specific sense to understand that the soil is wet or whatever is to find like somewhat fertile soil when like past ancestors wanting to find better fields to like plant or whatever, or just find better places to scavenge. But that's more or less just a theory rather than have proper evidence, because it's a bit difficult to study, but it's an interesting thing.
Yeah. I think I've only seen it like in the movies, like for example in Mean Girls, but there was no scientific evidence on that. So yeah, that was funny.
Yes, the scientific integrity of Mean Girls.
Yeah.
I use it all the time in my studies, of course.
Yeah, definitely.
And now we're coming up to our final question.
Yes, so our final question we got is, here hygrometers measures relatively humidity by utilizing the fact that human hair changes length depending on moisture levels. So how and why? So human hair is hygroscopic, yes. Its keratin fibers absorb water vapor from the air, and it causes them to swell and lengthen. So it swells and it gets longer. This happens because water molecules form weak hydrogen bonds inside the hair's protein structure, which loses its coiled keratin and allows it to stretch out. From arid to very humid conditions, that length change can be around like 2 to 3%, which is enough that it can mechanically translate it into pointer movement kind of on a dial.
Yeah, so when the humidity increases, the hair absorbs moisture, it expands and then elongates. So, but when the humidity drops, it reverses, so it contracts. So the hair hygrometers harness this by anchoring a hair strand under the tension and linking its tiny length shifts to a needle or a pointer or a calibrated scale. So this was invented in the 18th century by Horace Benedict de Saussure. I'm sorry if I butchered it.
Benedict de Saussure, I think.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Never mind.
French people.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Anyways, due to its consistent response, the device remained in use until the 1960s for reliable humidity readings. So by the 1960s, the hair-based hygrometers were largely phased out in favor of electronic humidity sensors, which offered definitely a faster response, better reliability, and also easier integration. Yeah.
And also, a fun fact is that I actually learned this a couple of 1 or 2 days ago. So there's the same keratin scales that let hair respond to moisture can also absorb oil, and so there's been collected hair clippings, and the hair, usually this comes from collected hair clippings that are packed into mats or boom style snakes with nylon fabric, and that soak up to 5 times their weight in oil, and they're they're like biodegradable, low cost, and also absorbent. And they're used in major spills like the Deepwater Horizon and the Costco Busan that happened. And this sort of eco hack, to say, actually began back in like 1989 when a hairstylist in Alabama named Phil McCory was inspired by watching the CNN coverage of the Exxon Valdez disaster. And he stuffed his salon's hair clippings into a stocking and watched it clear up oil from a small kiddie pool, like his kid's kiddie pool, in like a few minutes. And then later on in like 1999, he partnered with the nonprofit Matter of Trust to scale the idea. And now salons and groomers worldwide send their trimmings to be felted into hair meds and booms for environment cleanups.
Okay, that's actually amazing.
Yes, so
Yes.
it could end up being that when you've been to a salon or whatever in the recent years or throughout your lifetime, that it's somewhere in the ocean cleaning up oil right now.
Well,
So at least part of you is doing some sort of ecological activism in a sense.
yeah.
Though it shouldn't just stop there, and it's something that it's a duty for all of us to try and take care of our planet,
Okay,
as it is the only one we have.
Yeah.
And that is it. Thank you all for listening to our last episode and for sending us your questions. They've been
We really
quite
appreciate-
interesting.
Yeah.
We've also learned new things from your questions by researching them and
Yeah.
seeing what's actually going on. This series has been fun, and I think, at least for myself, I will a bit miss doing this because it's been such a bit of like a creative sort of break, even though it's filled with science. It was a bit of a creative break from the monotony of what we have done throughout our program.
Yeah. This
It
was definitely a
fun.
first for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you all. Those that were from the very beginning, those that have joined us from today or from the future.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
If we ever come back, you'll be first to know. So if this is something you might be interested, maybe subscribe, maybe follow, maybe comment.
Yeah.
We might not. We might. Yes, we might not. Who knows? Maybe not us. Who knows? But
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Have a great time. Bye.
Bye.